Human drives alien girl through a sandstorm escape route, only to see the horizon split open. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jason Wood had been driving for hours, fighting against the howling winds of the sandstorm that battered his truck. The storm had come out of nowhere, a wall of swirling dust and sand that had turned the sky a ghostly orange. Jason's knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, his eyes squinting against the sand that lashed against the windshield. He could feel the truck bucking against the fierce winds, the tires struggling for traction on the rocky, uneven ground. But it wasn't the storm that had him worried. It was the alien girl in the passenger seat, Lyra, that had his heart racing. He didn't know how she had gotten here, or why she was so far from her people, but she had come to him for help, and Jason wasn't the type to turn someone away. Especially not someone like her. Lyra's skin was a pale shade of green, her large eyes glowing faintly in the dim cabin light. She was quiet, too quiet, as if she were lost in a world of her own. The injury on her leg had been serious, but Jason had done what he could with the little medical supplies he had. Now, all he could do was push on. He had to get them out of this storm, find shelter, or they wouldn't survive the night. The wind howled louder, and Jason leaned into the wheel, his muscles tensing as the truck veered to the side. He fought to keep it steady, the sandstorm pushing harder against them with every passing second. In the distance, he saw the faint outline of something ahead. A cliffside, perhaps? It was the only thing he could make out through the thick dust. "Hold on, Lyra," Jason muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the storm. Lyra didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Jason glanced over at her, his heart aching at the way she looked, so fragile, so alone. It wasn't long before the truck reached the base of the cliff. He slammed on the brakes, the wheels skidding to a halt. As the dust began to settle, Jason turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, his hands still clutching the wheel. They had made it. They were safe, for now. But the real danger was still out there. The storm might pass, but the world they had just entered was more dangerous than Jason could imagine. And the horizon, that strange and terrifying horizon, was only just beginning to reveal its secrets. Jason sat still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the wind as it shifted around the cliffside. The storm had not ended, but the rock formation shielded them just enough to breathe. Dust clung to the truck's windows like a second skin, and every breath carried the dry taste of sand. Lyra shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim cabin light. She looked tired, her features softened by exhaustion, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself upright. Jason reached for a canteen and offered it to her. "Small sips," he said, watching as she took it gently. Her hands were cool against the metal. "Thank you, Jason," she murmured, her voice barely carried by the calm between gusts. He nodded, stepping out of the truck to inspect the surroundings. The air outside felt thick, warm, and restless. Sand spiraled at his feet, pulled by unseen currents. He pressed a hand to the truck's hood. "Still warm. Good." They had time before the engine cooled. He scanned the cliff wall, tracing its uneven edges with his eyes. There had to be a crevice or hollow large enough to shelter them until sunrise. Anything would be better than staying exposed. Behind him, Lyra slowly climbed out of the truck. Jason moved quickly to steady her without drawing attention to her weakness. She managed a small smile. "I can walk," she said softly. "Maybe not far, but I can." He admired her determination, her resilience in a world that seemed determined to crush it. "Stay close," he said. "The wind is unpredictable out here." They walked along the cliff base, their steps sinking slightly into the loosened sand. The storm roared above them, but down here it was softer, like distant thunder rolling through a long canyon. Jason spotted a narrow opening halfway concealed by a fallen slab of rock. The gap was dark, cool air drifting from within. "This might work," he said. Lyra peered inside, her eyes adjusting faster than his. "It is safe," she whispered. "Deep, but not too deep. And dry." Jason ducked inside first, brushing loose sand from the stone walls. It was small but sheltered, the ground firm and flat. He motioned for Lyra to join him. She stepped in slowly, lowering herself onto the smoothest section of stone she could find. Jason sat across from her, listening as the wind shifted again outside, rattling the rock but not breaking through. Lyra studied him with quiet curiosity. "Humans choose to help so quickly," she said. "Even when the cost is high." He shook his head lightly. It did not feel like a choice. Her gaze softened, a faint glow flickering in her eyes. "My people believe the desert reveals truth," she said. "It strips away everything until only what matters remains." Jason let that settle in the silence that followed. The storm outside pulsed with a low rumble. He looked toward the entrance, expecting another gust of dust, but something else moved beyond the veil of sand, something faint, a shimmer he could not explain. Lyra noticed it too. Her breath caught. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "the horizon is changing." He leaned forward, and in that moment the world outside shifted as if pulled open from the center, a quiet glow spilling into the storm. And Jason felt, without understanding how, that everything around them had just crossed into something new. The faint glow outside was not just light, it felt alive, stretching across the horizon as if the desert itself were breathing. Jason's heart raced as he stood up, moving cautiously toward the entrance of the narrow crevice. Lyra's eyes followed him, her gaze flickering between him and the strange shimmer that had appeared in the distance. The storm outside continued to rage, but it now seemed distant, as though the world beyond the cliff had shifted entirely. "What is that?" Jason asked, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly would break the strange calm that had settled. "In the air." "I do not know," Lyra replied, her tone steady but filled with an unspoken awe. "But it is not natural." Jason took a step forward, peering out into the storm. The horizon had split open, the sand swirling away in long, graceful arcs, revealing something that shouldn't have been there. A massive shape loomed in the distance, slowly becoming clearer, like something ancient and forgotten, slowly waking from the depths of the earth. "We need to move," Jason said, his voice firm, urging Lyra to follow. She hesitated for a moment, still captivated by the sight, before nodding and standing with careful grace. She moved toward him, her steps light despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Jason could feel his pulse quicken as he led them away from the crevice, moving toward the edge of the cliff where they could get a better view of the shifting landscape. As they walked, the air grew warmer, the wind softening as if the storm had decided to give them a temporary reprieve. The ground beneath their feet felt solid, a contrast to the chaos that had been just moments ago. Reaching the edge, Jason stopped, his eyes locked on the massive shape in the distance. It was like a tower of jagged stone, reaching toward the sky, its surface shimmering with strange iridescent colors that didn't belong to the desert. It looked as if it had been there forever, yet somehow, it was just emerging, pushing through the layers of sand and time. "What is that thing?" Jason asked again, more to himself this time, trying to make sense of it. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze intense, studying the structure with a mixture of wonder and fear. "It is an ancient artifact," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of knowledge that Jason couldn't fully understand. "Not many still remember the stories of these places. They were built long before my people even knew this world existed." Jason glanced at her, feeling a chill despite the warmth in the air. "So it's dangerous?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes. And whatever it is, it has begun to wake." Jason's hand tightened around the strap of his bag, his mind racing. He didn't know what they had stumbled upon, but it was clear that this was no ordinary desert, and Lyra wasn't just an ordinary alien girl. They were standing at the edge of something much larger than either of them could have imagined. "We need to get closer," Jason said, the the determination in his voice overriding any sense of caution. Lyra didn't argue. She simply followed as he took his first step toward the unknown. They moved quickly, though the terrain was unfamiliar, and every step seemed to take them further into a world that was both alien and familiar. As they drew closer to the massive shape, the air seemed to hum with energy, like the desert was alive, watching them, waiting. Jason felt a strange pull, an undeniable urge to keep moving forward, despite the unease that simmered beneath the surface. The closer they got, the more intense the sensation became, like something was calling to them, drawing them into its depths. And yet, for all its power, there was something oddly peaceful about it, as though they were meant to be here. Finally, they reached the base of the structure, and Jason looked up, his breath catching in his throat. The tower loomed above them, its surface shifting and changing as if it were alive, breathing with them. Lyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable, her eyes wide as she took in the sight. "We've reached it," she said softly. "The place where the past and future collide." Jason didn't know what that meant, but as he stood there, looking up at the towering structure, he realized one thing: their journey had only just begun. Jason stood at the base of the towering structure, his mind racing as the wind began to shift again, carrying with it a sense of something ancient stirring in the air. The very earth beneath his boots seemed to hum, like a quiet pulse, steady and persistent, as if the tower was alive in ways he couldn't begin to understand. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes not just fixed on the structure but seemingly connected to it, as though it were calling to her. He glanced at her, noting the intensity in her gaze. "What is it?" he asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. "This place, it's where the truth of my people begins," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of unspoken history. "The tower is not just a relic, it's a key." Jason frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "A key to what?" She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something else, something deeper. "A key to understanding why my people are scattered, why we are lost." Jason felt a chill run through him, the weight of her words pressing on him. He had thought the storm outside was the worst of their trials, but now he understood: this place, this tower, held secrets that could change everything. "We need to go inside," Lyra said, taking a step forward, her hand lightly touching the cool surface of the tower. As her fingers brushed against the stone, a soft pulse of light rippled across the structure. Jason watched, mesmerized, as the stone seemed to come alive, glowing faintly. "It's reacting to you," he murmured. Lyra didn't respond, her focus entirely on the tower as if she were waiting for something to happen. Slowly, the ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble echoing through the desert. The sand shifted, swirling around their feet as the entrance to the tower slowly began to open, a massive stone door sliding silently to the side. Jason felt a surge of both awe and fear. "This is it," Lyra whispered, more to herself than to him. She stepped forward, and Jason followed, every instinct telling him that they were about to uncover something that could change the fate of both their worlds. Inside, the air was cool, a stark contrast to the hot desert outside. The interior was dark, but as they stepped deeper, faint lights began to flicker on, illuminating walls covered in intricate carvings and symbols. Jason's eyes widened as he took in the sheer scale of the place. The carvings seemed to tell a story, one that he couldn't quite follow, but the images of ancient battles and celestial events were unmistakable. "This was built by your people?" he asked, his voice reverberating in the stillness. Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. "Yes, but not by them alone," she said quietly. "There are others, ancient beings who left their mark on this place. It's part of what my people have forgotten." Jason's pulse quickened. "And what does it mean? What are we supposed to do here?" Lyra paused in front of a large pedestal, her fingers tracing the air above it. "We awaken the truth," she said. Her voice was steady now, filled with purpose. "The truth that was buried. The truth about why we are here and what we must do next." As she spoke, a low hum began to emanate from the pedestal, and the carvings on the walls shifted, revealing new symbols. Jason's heart raced as the air around them thickened with energy. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it. The tower was alive, and it was waiting for something they were about to unlock. Slowly, Lyra placed her hands on the pedestal, and the entire room seemed to breathe. The lights grew brighter, and the hum intensified. Jason stepped closer, his breath shallow, unsure of what was happening, but knowing that they were on the verge of something monumental. Then, as if responding to an unseen command, the room was filled with a brilliant light, blinding him for a moment. When his vision cleared, he looked around, and what he saw shook him to his core. The walls had come to life, revealing images of alien landscapes, stars, and cities unlike anything he had ever seen. But most striking were the figures, tall, ancient beings, their features both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They stood in front of the tower, watching, waiting. "What is this?" Jason whispered. Lyra stepped back, her eyes wide with shock. "The truth, we've found it," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just about us. It's about the galaxy." Jason looked at her, then back at the images, the weight of their significance sinking in. "We've just uncovered the past," he said slowly. "But what does that mean for the future?" Lyra met his gaze, a hint of fear in her eyes. "It means everything is about to change." The light from the pedestal still flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls, but Jason felt a deep unease growing inside him. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes locked on the images now shifting before them. It was as though the tower itself was speaking, revealing the secrets of a lost era. He watched as the ancient beings, those towering figures in the holograms, moved across what appeared to be a vast, starry expanse. The images shifted, showing not just the past, but also what looked like a deep, tangled web of connections between worlds. "What is this?" Jason asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to him, her face pale, a shadow of fear crossing her features. "This is what my people were part of," she said slowly, her voice trembling. "This is why we are scattered, why we are so few now." Jason stepped closer to her, the magnitude of her words hitting him. "These are your people?" he asked, staring at the figures in the images, their eyes filled with knowledge and power, their bodies radiating an aura of something ancient. Lyra nodded, her gaze still fixed on the screen. "They were the architects of the galaxy," she explained. "They shaped the stars, the planets, everything. But they were lost to time. The tower, it holds the truth about what happened to them, what caused their downfall." Jason felt a chill run through him. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. "And this is why you came here?" Lyra didn't answer at first, her eyes still glued to the images. She reached out and touched the air in front of her, her fingers brushing against the holographic display. The images flickered again, showing something new, something more disturbing. "This is the final message they left," she whispered. "A warning." Jason's heart raced as the scene before them began to change. It showed a massive explosion of light, the galaxy quaking under the force of something unseen. There was chaos, destruction, a cataclysmic event that shook the very foundations of the universe. And then, the images froze, leaving only darkness. What happened?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a breath. Lyra's voice was barely audible when she spoke. "They brought it upon themselves. They reached too far. And then, they disappeared." Jason looked at her, trying to understand. "What did they reach for?" Lyra's eyes were full of sadness, the weight of her people's history heavy in her gaze. "They tried to control the stars. They tried to master everything. But in the end, they destroyed themselves." Jason didn't know what to say. The implications of her words were enormous, too vast for him to comprehend fully. "And what does this mean for us?" he asked. Lyra turned to face him, her expression firm, her resolve strengthening. "It means that whatever they were searching for, whatever power they unleashed, it's still out there. And now, we have to decide whether to stop it, or to awaken it again." Jason swallowed hard. He had thought that coming to this desert, helping Lyra, would lead to answers. But now, standing in the shadow of the tower, with the weight of an entire galaxy's history on his shoulders, he realized that they had only just begun to uncover the truth. The storm outside had not passed, but it felt different now, as though it too was waiting, watching for what was about to come. Lyra stepped away from the pedestal, her eyes still focused on the shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing second. "We can't stay here long," she said quietly. "The truth is here, but so is the danger." Jason nodded, his mind spinning with the enormity of what they had discovered. He had no idea what the next step was, or even what it all meant, but one thing was clear, they could not turn back. They were already too deep into something far bigger than either of them had expected. "Let's go," Jason said, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "We need to figure this out. And we need to find out what's really waiting for us out there." Jason and Lyra moved swiftly through the corridors of the ancient tower, the air around them thick with the energy of the space. The hum that had filled the room earlier now seemed to pulse with an almost tangible force, reverberating through the walls and floor, as if the very structure was alive. Jason felt a mixture of awe and fear, knowing that whatever lay ahead could either change everything or destroy them. He glanced at Lyra, who seemed unfazed by the growing intensity around them, her eyes fixed on something just beyond his reach, her expression focused and determined. "What are we looking for?" Jason asked, his voice carrying the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on him. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing lightly against the glowing symbols on the walls, which flickered in response to her touch. "The core," she said, her voice steady. "It's the heart of this place. Where everything began." They continued walking, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The deeper they went, the more Jason felt a sense of urgency. It was as if time itself was stretching and warping in the presence of whatever was ahead. As they turned a corner, they came upon a massive door, intricately designed with symbols Jason couldn't begin to understand. The energy in the room intensified, and the door seemed to pulse, alive in its own right. Lyra stopped in front of it, her hand resting just above the surface. "This is it," she said softly. Jason stood behind her, watching the intricate patterns of light play across the door. "Are you sure?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her face set with determination. "There's no turning back now." Without another word, she stepped forward, and the door opened with a slow, grinding motion. Inside, the room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into shadow. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a large, glowing orb. The orb hummed with an energy that Jason could feel deep within his chest, as if it were pulling at the very core of his being. "What is that?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The core," Lyra replied. "The source of the power my people once wielded. The knowledge, the control, it's all contained in there." She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving the orb. "It's what we lost, Jason. What we failed to protect." Jason took a cautious step closer to her, his eyes fixed on the orb. It was mesmerizing, its glow shifting with every movement, the colors constantly changing. He could feel its pull, the weight of its significance. "Can you unlock it?" he asked, though part of him wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer. Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering. "I can," she said, "but it won't be easy. It requires more than just a key. It requires sacrifice." Jason frowned, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. "Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice?" Lyra turned to face him, her expression serious. "The power within that orb is more than anyone, even my people, ever imagined. To unlock it, we must give up something. It will demand a price." Jason felt a chill, the weight of her words settling over him. He didn't know what that price would be, but he could already feel it. This journey, this discovery, was far from over. "And what if we can't pay that price?" he asked, the question lingering in the air between them. Lyra's gaze softened, but her answer was resolute. "Then everything we've uncovered, everything we've fought for, will be for nothing." She turned back to the pedestal, her hand reaching out toward the orb. Jason stood behind her, watching, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on them both. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure, they had already crossed a line, and there was no going back. Lyra's fingers brushed the surface of the orb, and the room seemed to shudder, as if it were alive, reacting to her touch. The air grew heavy with anticipation, and Jason could only watch, helpless and uncertain, as the glow from the orb intensified, lighting up the entire room in an otherworldly radiance. The room around Jason and Lyra seemed to pulse with energy as her fingers continued to hover over the orb. It had grown brighter, its light flickering like a heartbeat, quickening with every passing second. Jason could feel the tension building in the air, thick and heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The hum of the tower was now louder, vibrating through the floor, and Jason found himself stepping back slightly, his gaze fixed on the orb. Lyra was completely focused, her expression tense, as if every part of her being was connected to whatever was inside that glowing sphere. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that felt like it was stretching into infinity. Then, with a sudden burst of light, the orb flared brighter than before, casting sharp shadows against the walls. Jason squinted, the brilliance almost too much to bear. "Lyra," he called, his voice strained. She didn't respond. Her eyes were closed now, her hands trembling slightly as she continued to reach out. The room trembled in time with the orb, and Jason's heart raced. He stepped forward, reaching for her, but before he could touch her, the air around them seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in temperature, a small tug at the back of his mind. But then it grew. The light from the orb seemed to extend, stretching outward, covering the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Jason felt a pressure in his chest as the space around them expanded, as if the very room was stretching to accommodate the force of what was happening. "Lyra," he shouted again, his voice desperate. This time, her eyes flickered open. They glowed with the same strange intensity as the orb, filled with a mix of pain and recognition. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know if I can hold it, it's too much." Jason reached out for her, his hand closing around hers. "Lyra, you have to stop." But as he touched her, the energy around them surged, and he felt himself pulled in, as if the very air had become magnetic. His breath caught in his throat as the room seemed to collapse around them, and for a moment, everything went dark. He tried to call out again, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Then, just as quickly as it had all started, the pressure released. The room fell silent once more, and Jason found himself back on solid ground. He blinked, disoriented, trying to gather his bearings. The orb had dimmed, the intense light fading, leaving behind a faint glow. He turned to Lyra, who was now kneeling on the ground, her head bowed, her breathing shallow. "Lyra," he asked, his voice soft, full of concern. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes returning to their normal color, but the weariness in them was unmistakable. "It's done," she said quietly. "But it's not over. We've opened the door, but now, we have to face what comes next." Jason knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "What comes next?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Lyra's gaze drifted to the now dim orb, the faint glow still pulsing softly in the center of the room. "The power inside this place, inside me, is no longer just mine. It's part of something larger, something that has been waiting for centuries to be unleashed. And now, it will come for us." Jason felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what Lyra was talking about, but he could feel it, whatever this was, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was alive, and it was coming for them. "How do we stop it?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We don't," she said simply. "We can't stop what's already been set in motion. All we can do now is survive." Jason's heart sank. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He had no idea what was about to happen, but one thing was certain, they were no longer just dealing with an ancient relic. They had unleashed something far greater than they had ever imagined. And whatever it was coming for them. The silence in the room was deafening. Jason could feel the weight of Lyra's words hanging in the air, suffocating him. He stood there, frozen for a moment, his mind trying to process what she had just said. They had opened the door to something far bigger than either of them had imagined. And now, whatever it was coming for them. He turned to Lyra, her eyes dull with exhaustion, but there was something else in them too, a quiet resolve. "How do we survive this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts to remain calm. Lyra's gaze flickered toward the orb, which was now dim and still, as though it were resting, waiting. She took a slow, deep breath before answering, her voice steady. "We don't have a choice. The power that's been awakened is linked to the core of this world. It's connected to everything, every star, every planet. And it's been lying dormant, waiting for something, or someone, to unlock it." Jason's heart raced as he tried to grasp the enormity of her words. "And now that it's unlocked, what happens?" Lyra's eyes met his, filled with an intensity that made him shiver. "It will want to spread. To consume. To take control. It's not just a relic, it's an entity. One that's been waiting for centuries to be set free." Jason stepped back, his mind whirling with the implications of her words. He had known they were in danger, but this? This was something else entirely. "But we have to stop it, right? We can't just let it take over." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned toward the pedestal once more. "We can't stop it. Not now. But we can try to survive long enough to figure out how to contain it. We need to find the others who can help us. Those who know what this power truly is and what it wants." Jason nodded, despite the fear gnawing at him. "Then let's go. We need to get out of here." He turned and began moving toward the door, but Lyra's voice stopped him. "It's not that simple," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. Jason turned back to her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes flickered to the walls of the chamber, where the same glowing symbols from earlier seemed to shift and change, their light flickering like a heartbeat. "The tower is alive. It won't let us leave without consequences." Jason's stomach dropped. "What kind of consequences?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her face contorting slightly as if she were listening to something Jason couldn't hear. "We've disturbed something powerful," she said at last, her voice low. "The tower has been waiting for us to awaken it, and now that it has, it won't just let us walk away. We'll be marked." Jason felt a chill at her words, his pulse quickening. "Marked? What does that mean?" Lyra opened her eyes, her expression filled with a mixture of dread and understanding. "It means we have a time limit. The tower will come for us, either to use us, or to make sure we don't escape with what we know." Jason's breath caught in his throat as the full weight of their situation sank in. "So, we have no choice but to keep moving forward," he said quietly, the truth settling in. Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze hardening with determination. "We survive, and we figure out how to stop it. That's all we can do now." Jason met her gaze, his fear momentarily fading as he found the strength in her words. They had no choice but to face whatever was coming next. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: whatever they faced, they would do it together. With a final glance at the now dim orb, Jason turned and walked toward the exit. Lyra followed closely behind, her steps silent but sure. As they moved through the corridors of the tower, the walls seemed to shift with them, as though the very structure of the place was reacting to their presence. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting for them, just out of sight. And the deeper they went, the more intense the sensation became, like the tower itself was pulling them in, its heart beating in time with their own. They had unlocked something ancient, something dangerous. And now, it was up to them to survive long enough to understand what they had unleashed. Jason and Lyra moved through the tower's labyrinthine halls, the air thick with the strange hum of the structure. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the flickering lights cast elongated shadows that danced ahead of them. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the tower itself was responding to their presence. Jason's mind was spinning with everything they had uncovered, but there was no time to process it. They were running out of time. "Lyra, what exactly are we supposed to do now?" Jason's voice echoed slightly in the stillness, his words feeling almost too loud for the quiet that surrounded them. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was focused, her eyes scanning the walls as if she were looking for something. "We need to find the center," she said after a moment, her voice low and urgent. "The core. The place where all of this started. Once we're there, we might be able to reverse whatever's been triggered." Jason nodded, though his mind was racing with doubt. He had no idea what they were up against, and the thought that they might be able to reverse what had been unleashed seemed almost impossible. The tower had already begun to shift, reacting to their every movement. It was as if it had a life of its own, and now that they had awakened something within it, it wasn't going to let them leave easily. "So, we find the center," Jason repeated, "and then what?" "We just hope that we can fix this." Lyra's gaze flickered to him, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to," she said simply. "There's no other way. If we don't stop this, it will spread. And nothing will be the same." Jason felt a chill at her words, the weight of her meaning sinking in. Whatever they had unlocked, it wasn't just a relic. It was a force that could change the entire galaxy, and they were caught in its grasp. The further they moved through the tower, the more it felt like they were being led somewhere. The air grew warmer, thicker, as though the energy around them was increasing. Jason's heart raced, and he could feel the pull of something just ahead, something waiting for them. "We're close," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can feel it." Jason didn't respond, but his gaze was fixed on the corridor ahead. There was a faint light at the end, and he knew that it was their destination. As they approached the end of the hall, the air seemed to vibrate, and the wall shifted again, revealing a large chamber. The room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness, and at the center was a pedestal, much like the one they had seen before. But this one was different. It was glowing with a fierce, pulsating light, and as they stepped into the room, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on the pedestal. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. Jason followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. They had made it. But as he stepped closer, he realized that this wasn't just a pedestal. The light that radiated from it was not merely energy, it was alive, breathing, calling to them. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the light intensified, and he felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The room seemed to stretch and warp, as if time itself was bending around them. "Lyra, what's happening?" he asked, his voice shaking. Lyra's eyes were wide, her expression filled with a mix of fear and wonder. "It's the core," she whispered. "It's waking up." As she spoke, the orb atop the pedestal flared with light, and the air around them became thick with energy. Jason could feel it pulling at him, tugging at his very being, and he realized, with a sickening certainty, that they were standing at the threshold of something far greater than they had ever imagined. The tower was not just a structure, it was a vessel, and it was alive. And now, whatever power had been contained within it for centuries was ready to be unleashed. "We have to act now," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Jason nodded, but in that moment, he knew that they were no longer in control. The tower had awakened, and whatever it had planned, they were about to face it. With no choice but to move forward, they stepped into the light, not knowing what would come next. The power of the tower was beginning to flood the room, and the fate of everything, of both their worlds, was about to be decided.